Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon, by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 12. Pull yourself together, she heard the voice inside her head. Her own voice, stern and unyielding, and without pity for her pain or anyone else's. All right, said Iris. She pushed herself away from the soft leather upholstery of the wing chair, in which she had pressed her face in a vain effort to shut out both Vogel's words and the images that kept playing over and over on the screen behind her eyes. With the palms of her hands, she wiped away the tears that had dampened both her skin and the chair's. Tell me what you want. What I want, Vogel regarded her smugly. Maybe it's time to ask that question of yourself. I just want out of here. Iris stood up from the chair, wiping her hands across the front of her trousers. This whole thing is crazy. I don't even know why I'm in this place. The moment of revelation she'd experienced, sparked by the screen image of the female replicant Rachel's face. The mirror image of her own had already faded. Her shoulders hunched with deep physical revulsion as she looked around the dark space, the glow of the candles barely able to push back the tonnage of ruins she felt weighing above her head. You're the one who dragged me in here for some god-awful, idiotic reason. I don't care what your agenda is anymore. Anger tensed in her voice. The humiliation of having broken down in front of Vogel, weeping like a child as he'd regarded her in silence, took her resentment up another notch. I don't care about some stupid fucking owl. I don't care who wants it or why. I don't care what anybody's going to do to me if I can't find it. You should care. There's some heavy people involved. I'm beyond caring, said Iris bluntly. I don't know if that's what you wanted to accomplish, but if that was on your list of personal goals. But you've accomplished that much at least. I'm going to walk out of here. You wouldn't be able to find your way, Vogel said. I'll dig myself out then, straight up and out of this mess. Her trembling hands clenched into near fists, as if her nails were poised to start prying at the rubble stacked above her. She headed for the private theater's door, making a quick, dismissive gesture at the empty screen on the far wall. One way or another. I don't have time for this. It's all you have time for. Vogel followed her out into the other room, brighter lit with its massed ranks of candles. Don't fool yourself. Now that you've gotten this close. He reached out with his good hand, grabbing her shoulder to stop and pull her around to face him. Why do you think you're reacting the way you are? After all you've been through, what's the big deal about seeing someone who's got the same face as you? Lowering his head, he peered closer into her eyes. That's what you've got to ask yourself. And that's what I told you. I don't give a shit about. Iris angrily shoved his hand away from her. I'm out of here. I'm not interested in any more of your home movies. Show them to somebody who cares. All right, said Vogel mildly. He stepped back from her and smiled, radiating a superior attitude that infuriated Iris even more. Maybe I'll show them to that other woman, the one named Rachel. With a tilt of his head, he indicated the private theater and its blank, empty screen. The one your face really belongs to. Yeah, right! Disgust welled up in Iris, heavy enough to be felt on her tongue. You're going to run that old joke by me? It's the creakiest one in the book. She stood with both hands on her hips, shaking her head as she regarded him. That whole business. What if the Blade Runners are really replicants themselves? That's about as dumb as it gets. Really? Vogel looked as amused as before. What's so dumb about it? Everything, snapped Iris. For one, I've already heard that joke. It was maybe funny the first 100 times I heard it. For Christ's sake, that's one Blade Runner's tell to each other. It's like basic cop shop locker room wisecracking. Hey, what if we're the ones who are replicants? Wouldn't that be a crack up? Granted, every once in a while, somebody in the division has some kind of mental collapse and starts believing it's true. But by then, they're usually so far around on the Wombog self-loathing curve, they're about ready to eat their gun muzzles anyway. So it's no big loss. And it doesn't make the joke any funnier or any less creaky. What if it's not a joke? Get real, said Iris. It is a joke. It's nothing but the standard. Set an old cat to catch an old rat theory. What better way to catch replicants than with some other replicant, right? Like there'd be some special wavelength that they're all on together. The only problem is that there's a definitive physiological test for replicants. The bone marrow examination. Replicants have a distinctive regularity to their bone structure that's only visible under exhaustive inventorying using an electron scanning microscope, which are still just a little too heavy for agents in the field to carry around with them when they're trying to track down and retire some escaped reps. Plus the amount of batteries you'd run through keeping something like that powered up. Not to mention that it takes about 2 days to get the results cranked out. That's a long time to ask some suspected replicant to stand around and wait to see if you're going to put a bullet through his head or not. Impatient bastards that they are. Considering that you're about to ice them, said Vogel, maybe they've got a right to have something more accurate than the Void Conf run on them. The Void Conf's accurate enough. Nobody complains about it afterwards, do they? But that's beside the point. You want to know whether Blade Runners are 100% human or not? Fine. That's why when you join the police department, you do get one of those bone marrow exams run on you. I still got the scar where the LAPD medics punched in for the sample. Iris pushed the ragged sleeve of her jacket up past her elbow, turning her arm to display a dime-sized, faded mark on her biceps. Hurt like a son of a bitch too, I can tell you. But when the results come back from the lab 2 days later, and you pass, and you're in, then you don't have to wonder about crap like that anymore. No, you don't. Vogel's thin smile was more unpleasant than it had ever been before. You just have to wonder if the LAPD would give you the real results of the bone marrow test, or whether it would simply tell you whatever it wanted you to hear. Shit! Iris's right fist clenched tighter, as if she were about to launch it right into Vogel's insinuating smile, which meant she knew that she didn't have an answer in words that she could fire back at him. "Look," she said finally, "forget about proving whether any Blade Runners are human or not. You know why? Because it doesn't matter. They get the job done. That's what's important. I got the job done when I was a Blade Runner. So what would it matter if I were a replicant?" "You tell me," said Vogel. "You're the one who burst into tears when you finally realized that some other woman, supposedly a replicant, has the exact same face as you. One of you has a problem." "Yeah? Well, it's not me." Iris looked away, scanning the candle-lit room and trying to reconstruct the route by which she had gotten there. "I've been under a lot of stress lately, all right. And you took me by surprise with that one." There seemed to be a confusing number of doors available, any one of which might open onto the tunnel through the piled-up mass of ruins. So I had a little breakdown. I don't know why, but it's over now. If you want to go around thinking that Rachel person, or whatever her name was, is the real human being and I'm the replicant, fine, whatever. But I'm not exactly worried about my ex-boss Meyer sending the troops from the Blade Runner Division out after me. The thought, a belated retort to Vogel's insinuations, had just struck her. If I'm supposed to be a replicant, why didn't Meyer have one of the other Blade Runners retire me as soon as I was bounced out of the police department? Hell, Meyer could have done it himself, right there on the spot. He carries a piece around with him, and the way things are going for him right now, he could have used the money. So tell me, smart guy, if I'm a replicant, why am I still... Shut up. What? Iris was more pleased than offended by any evidence of getting under the smug Vogel skin. What did you... I said be quiet. Vogel held up his good hand and made a gesture for silence. Listen, I don't hear anything, said Iris after a moment. Vogel's gaze lifted toward the dark spaces at the room's lofty ceiling, beyond the reach of the candlelight. That's because you don't know what to listen for. His voice had sunk to a tense whisper. You don't know this place. You've never been here before. Yeah, and I don't want to be here again. Iris broke off as she heard a distant noise, a faint scraping and thud of metal against concrete somewhere above their heads. That's not good, she said, her own whisper matching Vogel's. What's going on? Her pulse ticked faster. Is this place coming down? Vogel remained silent as he listened intently to whatever was happening above. Look, I don't care for the idea of being buried alive in here, or even dead. Given the mass of rubble and the sheer tonnage involved, if the ruins were to settle further and snuff Eldon Tyrell's private quarters out of existence, the two of them would be crushed, lifeless in a matter of seconds. Let's get going. Don't move. They'll hear you. Then they'll be able to tell exactly where we're at. They? Iris looked up at the ceiling. The noises had stopped for a moment, then started again, fainter, but also detectably closer. Who is it? Of the possibilities that raced through her thoughts, none was pleasant. Maybe, she thought, Meyer did decide to retire me, not only out of the police department, but for good. How did they know we're here? They always know, said Vogel. They know before you do, or at least he does. He? Iris frowned in puzzlement. What he are you talking about? Vogel didn't appear to have heard her. This isn't supposed to be happening, he muttered. The expression on his sharp, angled face darkened as he tilted his head back, slitted eyes focusing on some point beyond the room's ceiling. It's not in the script. There's a script? Iris peered closer at him. What's that supposed to mean? Right now, Vogel's distracted attention returned to her. You don't need to know. And there isn't time for me to tell you about it. We've got to get you out of here. We've got to get out of here. Glad you agree, said Iris. That's where I've been heading for a while now. She nodded toward the room's tall, brass-fitted doors. Which one did we come in by? Forget that, Vogel said. We can't go out the same way we came in. You should know that by now. Nobody can ever go back. There's only forward, even if you don't know where you're going. Great, thought Iris disgustedly, always with the deep commentary. Yeah, but if that's the quickest way out of here... I said forget it. Vogel's brow creased with furious concentration. I've worked with the guy long enough to know how his mind operates, especially how he figures other people are going to react. A long, simmering resentment tinged Vogel's words. He always underestimates everybody else. He's got this godlike, uber perspective on human affairs. Who? To Iris, the other's description sounded as though it were something personal. Is this person who lifted the owl from me? Is this the person who lifted the owl from me back in my apartment? So now I take it that he's got a whole crew with him? The burrowing and scraping sounds from the rubble above had become noticeably louder, indicating a number of unwanted visitors. Maybe, thought Iris, they're the ones, or what's left of them, from the movie theater. Which was not good. They wouldn't be likely to be in a pleasant mood when they found her here. Who is this guy? Wrong guess, said Vogel. Different kind of trouble entirely, but definitely trouble. When he starts deviating from the script, it's because he thinks he has to. That means he's going to be worried about having lost control of the project. Vogel bit the corner of his lower lip. What it also means is that he must have caught me going off script. Shit. He glanced around the corners of the room, near the beamed ceiling. I didn't figure he'd have this place wired as well. This whole sequence was supposed to be off camera. Vogel's expression turned even more bitter and brooding, which was what was in the script. So if he was able to catch me deviating, that means he didn't trust me from the beginning. Why the hell should anyone trust you? Iris flung her hands up in exasperation. You said you went off some script you were supposed to be following, and he caught... Wait a minute. She pulled herself up short, having found herself in Vogel's spiraling mental loop. I don't even know who we're talking about. Figure it out, snapped Vogel. He grabbed Iris's forearm with his good hand and pulled her with him toward the darker reaches of Tyrell's private quarters. It's the director! Director? Iris let herself be led past the reach of the candlelight, as much to discover what Vogel meant as to find a way out of the building's ruins. You mean the director of the movie? She pointed with her thumb back toward the theater. That Blade Runner thing I just watched? That's the one. Vogel let go of her arm so he could fish inside the pocket of his jumpsuit for his flashlight. With its beam flaring ahead, he kept walking at a fast enough clip that Iris had to hurry to keep up with him. Come on, they're going to be on us pretty soon, if we don't get a move on. Where we heading? Like I said, I know how his mind operates. Or Benton will figure that we're stupid enough to go running out the same way we got in here. And he'll have part of his production crew, the thug part, waiting for us. So we go another way. If there is one, said Iris. Don't worry. Vogel kept the flashlight aimed ahead of them. I know my way around this dump pretty well. Beginning to have my doubts, thought Iris. The floor underneath her boot soles had turned both broken, with the ends of bent steel girders poking through the once polished planks, and sharply tilted to one side. Enough light bounced back from the flashlight beam, hitting the walls to dimly reveal the condition of the ceiling overhead. The weight of the collapsed building's rubble had obviously hit this section of Eldon Tyrell's private quarters with enough force to warp the reinforced framework that had protected the other sections, twisting and flattening it like a lab rat's wire cage. Iris and Vogel had to duck beneath the bowed ceiling beams, shouldering aside dangling skeins of dead electrical wiring and data conduits. The stench of charred insulation sheaths was still strong enough to lodge choking in Iris's throat. The private quarters came to an end at a sheer cliff face of concrete rubble, bristling with lengths of corroded rebar. Crouching down with the top of his head barely an inch away from the buckled ceiling, Vogel pointed up. "We climb," he said. "Climb where?" Iris knelt beside him in the scattered glow from the flashlight. The floor beneath her was now so tilted that she had to dig in her fingernails to keep from sliding into Vogel. "You're skinny enough," said Vogel. "Shouldn't be any problem for you." He swung the flashlight upward, revealing a narrow gap between the vertical rubble and where the ceiling had been sheared away. "It's only tight for maybe 20 yards or so. Then it opens up. It's easy. Plenty of handholds." "Easy for me, maybe. But what about you?" Iris was close enough that she could poke the sling across his chest without even unbending her elbow. "What are you going to do? Stay down here and hold them off?" "The hell with it." Vogel pulled away the sling, now ragged and dirt-stained, wadded it in his hand and tossed it onto the loose rubble behind them. Flexing his fingers, he stretched out the arm that had been bound to the front of his jumpsuit. "Thing was giving me a cramp anyway." "Hey," Iris frowned at the sight. "You weren't hurt at all." "Not physically, no." A quick smile flashed across Vogel's face. "But you're leaving me there with those guys? That really cut me to the quick." Right, she thought in disgust. When there was time, she'd have to rethink her assumptions about what had gone down at the movie theater, where she had managed to lay hold of the owl. If Vogel had been faking any detail about what had happened to him, then the chances were good that a lot of other details were phonies as well. Maybe even the whole setup. Though she had to wonder what the point of that would have been. What Vogel or whoever was behind him would have been trying to accomplish with that kind of elaborate ruse. But for all she knew right now, the moment she had slipped out of the movie theater, Vogel and the other men had broken off their mutual gunfire and had stood around smoking and exchanging small talk. "You lying son of a bitch." Iris spoke the words almost without anger, except for that which she directed toward herself for having fallen for anything Vogel had ever told her. "You know, instead of scrambling up this chimney hole, I've got a notion that maybe I should stay right here instead and have a little talk with whoever it is that's dropping in on us." You don't want to do that. Vogel emphatically shook his head. That's a way bad idea. Yeah? Why? Look, I know you're going through a spasm of distrust at the moment. Vogel spoke with elaborate patience as he crouched beneath the buckled ceiling, with its dangling loops of wire and cable screening off the rest of what had been the Tyrell private quarters. I can understand that, and I can even admit it's somewhat deserved. I haven't been totally upfront with you about everything that's been going on. Or anything. We don't really have time to argue right now. Vogel held up a mollified hand, palm outward. Vogel held up a mollifying hand, palm outward. You can chew my ass raw when we get out of here, okay? What you have to realize is that you are in deep, deep trouble. Been there, said Iris. Done that. Worse this time, I promise you. If Benton has gone off script, there's no telling what could happen to you. You don't want to trust me about that? Fine, but look at it this way. He brought his face close to hers, so that in the dim radiance of the flashlight, she could see her own reflection in the dark centers of his eyes. As near as you've gotten to what you've been trying to accomplish. Getting hold of that owl. It's all been made possible by me. For better or worse. Mostly worse. Regardless, said Vogel. You don't have anyone else to trust other than yourself. And you can't say that's gone any better. So it's me or nobody. Maybe not. Iris glanced up at the cramped space's ceiling, then back to Vogel. There's always this director guy and his friends who are about ready to drop in on us. Sure, you got that option. I don't have any way of forcing you to get out of here. But just consider, his voice dropped in pitch and volume. What if you guess wrong about who you want to trust and distrust? If I tell you that it wouldn't be exactly pleasant for you to meet up with Benton and his crew, and you don't believe me, it could get real ugly for you if you guess wrong on that one. Let's face it, people haven't been playing softball with you lately. That much was true, at least. All right, Iris said Iris. She sighed. So I go first. Up the chute, I mean. Right. Vogel's thin smile appeared again. That way I'll know where you are. You're the boss. She turned and inched forward, cautiously lifting her head into the open space where the broken ceiling ended. As Vogel had promised, the wall of rubble had plenty of jagged crevices that she could dig her fingertips into. The ceiling's edge scraped past her shoulder blades and spine as she kicked the toes of her boots into the crags below and started to climb into the narrow darkness. Even without the occasional glint from Vogel's flashlight, a fraction of its beam sliding up past her face and hands, she could sense him below, climbing after her. Some of the handholds she found were fractured and crumbling, as though the concrete had been all but disintegrated by the force of the explosions that had collapsed the Tyrell Corporation headquarters. Bits of sharp-edged gravel slid under her palms and past her wrists. She took a certain wry satisfaction in imagining them raining down upon Vogel's upturned face. The gap through which they crawled ant-like opened up. After what seemed like a mile of scrambling effort, Iris felt that the back of her leatherite jacket was no longer scraping along the cliff face behind her. She could even breathe, taking in a complete lungful of the dust-laden, scorched-smelling air. Iris suddenly felt something grab her ankle and realized it was one of Vogel's hands, reaching up to snag her. Hold it! Vogel had switched off the flashlight, His whisper filtered through the darkness to her. "Don't say anything." She listened, and within a fraction of a second heard the same faint but distinct noises that Vogel must have detected. Whoever was burrowing down through the ruins, down to the Tyrell private quarters from which she and Vogel had just fled, the group was evidently within a few meters of their own position. Iris could hear the scraping sounds of smaller bits of rubble being shoved aside, clearing a parallel vertical shaft downward. The space in which Iris clung to the rubble face was open enough that Vogel was able to climb part way alongside her. She glanced down and could just discern the sharp angles of his face, close to her elbow. "They must think we're still down there," whispered Vogel. "Or Benton probably didn't wire all of the private quarters. Must have figured that there was no need to do the crushed end where we got out." She realized then that the dim glow by which she made out Vogel's face wasn't from his flashlight, but from the other group's work lights seeping through the network of crevices and fissures between herself and them. Holding her breath, she waited until the bits of stray light were swallowed up by darkness again, and the scraping and scrambling noises had faded a bit, coming now from a point some meters below. "We don't have much time." Iris kept her voice as low as Vogel's had been. "When they get down there, it won't take them long to figure out that we split on them." She glanced upward along the rubble face, trying to discern any indicator of its remaining height, then looked back down toward Vogel. "How much farther until we're at the surface?" "Still a ways to go." Vogel was completely hidden in the gap's darkness. "Get moving." Without any aid from Vogel's flashlight, Iris was forced to grope around for each new handhold. The sheer face of crumbling cement ended, giving way to a tangle of metal reinforcing rods knotted and twisted together into a steel rat's nest. She reached up and grasped a curved section of rebar and pulled herself up, bending her knees to bring her boot soles flat against the concrete rubble. That was a mistake. She realized immediately as the concrete broke apart, her boots pushing through a thin layer to a hollow space beyond. Her entire weight tugged forcefully on the rebar section onto which she was holding, arms extended straight above her head with a shriek of metal grinding across metal. The section stretched loose from the rest of the tangled rebar, dropping Iris several feet down. She dangled for a moment, twisting against the sheer rubble face, as though clinging to an immense elastic band. The unsteady motion, compounded by the surrounding darkness, sickened her to her stomach. Iris saw the flashlight beam spring on, cutting across the gap and catching first her wildly kicking legs, then darting up to her face, dazzling and blinding her for a moment. "Hold on!" called Vogel. There was no further point in whispering. The initial shriek of the rebar tearing loose would have penetrated every inch of the jumbled together ruins, alerting the others to their whereabouts. "I've got you!" Holding on to the rubble face with one hand, Vogel leaned out and reached for her. Iris took her hand from the rebar section and grabbed tightly onto Vogel's forearm. Even as he pulled her toward himself, shouts were audible, though made faint and echoingly garbled by the intervening distance and the twists and turns leading down to the remains of the Tyrell private quarters. With a sudden lurch, more of the tangled rebar came loose from above, instantly dropping Iris another couple of meters. Her grip instinctively tightened on Vogel's arm as she fell. That was enough to pull him off the rubble face. His other arm quickly grabbed around Iris's legs, stopping his own fall. Iris let go of his upward extended wrist, letting herself be bear hugged by Vogel around her knees, his head at a level with her stomach. "Not good," gasped Vogel needlessly, along with a quantity of loose concrete debris from the rubble face. The flashlight had fallen, clattering down the gap beneath them. Its beam shot upward into their eyes, then was extinguished as the lens and bulb shattered against a jagged cement outcropping. "This could have gone better." She didn't bother replying. Her locked straight arms, bearing both her own and Vogel's weight, were already beginning to ache as she and Vogel swayed in the darkness with the section of rebar that she grasped stretching and contracting with a nauseating elasticity. She could hear the others somewhere directly beneath them. That meant that the director, Benton's crew, if that was who they were, she still had no way of knowing for sure, had reached the Tyrell private quarters and specifically the crushed end of the rooms from which she and Vogel had ascended. It wouldn't be long before those others came swarming up the gap through its initial narrow section and then where it opened alongside the rubble face, and found the two of them dangling here. "I'm not waiting around," announced Iris. "Look, here's the deal. I can pull us up at least a little farther. Then you'll be able to grab hold of this bar yourself." Her arms were beginning to feel as if they were being pulled out of their sockets. "Then we can both climb up it separately." "Don't know about that." Vogel looked upward, past Iris's face. This metal stuff. It might not be too securely fastened." He sounded oddly calm and analytical, given the situation. "We're getting towards the surface, so a lot of the debris isn't weight compressed and packed together as tightly as the lower strata. If we start jostling this around with too much body movement, it could come tumbling down real fast." "So what do you suggest?" She tried to keep her own irritation, triggered by Vogel's objections, coldly under control. "Well," said Vogel, "the smart thing to do would be for one of us to let go and drop. That way there'd be less mass and weight dragging on this metal stuff, and the other person would have a better shot of getting out of here." "Yeah, right. That's a great idea. And the person who lets go either gets killed in the fall or gets whatever that bunch down below thinks should be coming to him or her. Are you volunteering?" "Not really," admitted Vogel. "Fine. Then we'll do it my way." With Vogel's arm wrapped around her legs, Iris reached and grabbed higher on the rebar section, pulling herself up. She had no desire to wait around any longer until their pursuers caught up with them. She could already hear voices from down below in the crushed end of the Tyrell private quarters. The knife-like ridges of the rebar cut into her palms and the bent joints of her fingers as she strained to drag herself and Vogel a few inches higher. Another lunging grasp, catching at a twisted angle in the metal, gave her a tight enough hold that she could wedge the horizontally slanting part under one arm. Using her back and shoulder muscles, Iris levered herself onto the piece, leaning forward so that it was across her stomach. "There! Right in front of you!" Breathless, she gasped the words out. "Grab it, for Christ's sake!" She felt one of Vogel's arms let go, then a downward pull in the rebar section to which she clung as he transferred his weight to its vertical section. The circulation in her legs started up again, no longer cut off by his vice-like grip. "You okay?" Vogel called to her. "Yeah," Iris nodded, even though she knew the darkness hid any such movement. She didn't bother to ask how he was doing. She didn't care, at least now that her arms no longer felt as if they were being yanked from their sockets by his added weight. Let's get going. Shifting position by grabbing the near horizontal rebar section in both hands, then drawing up and getting one knee onto it, Iris climbed higher onto the tangled metal. Before she moved again, she felt one of Vogel's hands brush her knee as he grabbed the section above him. The dark space in which they both hung suspended was suddenly lit up with glaring shafts of light. Iris saw her own and Vogel's elongated shadows leap upward, fracturing across the segments of the tangled skein of rebar to which they clung. The broken shadows danced for a moment, then were frozen into place as the searchlight beams aimed from just below found and locked onto the two of them, dazzling and blinding their shocked eyes. Iris realized immediately what had happened. The sounds and voices she and Vogel had heard coming from the Tyrell private quarters had been only a distraction to make them think that their pursuers were down there, when in fact a sizable number of the Director Urbanton's crew had been silently creeping up the narrow gap and then along the rubble face, closing in on them. Lifting her shoulder in a vain attempt to shield her eyes, Iris could barely make out the dark shapes behind the overlapping glare of the searchlights. But she could see that they were moving, approaching as rapidly as possible, all stealth discarded. She didn't bother saying anything to Vogel. She was already in motion as well, scrambling up onto the horizontal rebar section beside her, reaching at the same time as she did for the next piece that could be grabbed and used to pull themselves higher onto the tangled metal. Their parallel motion produced an ear-piercing, grinding shriek from the rebar as its rusted lengths scraped across each other, pulled taut by Iris's and Vogel's weight. The shriek went higher, a chorus bouncing and echoing off the ruins' angles as one of the pursuers grabbed hold of the bottom of the dangling metal and swung himself onto it. Bad move. That was all Iris had time to think. Before the tangled mass of rebar pulled free from whatever partial anchor it had had on the outcroppings of broken concrete and twisted steel girders above. Real bad move. The additional weight of the pursuer, along with the force of his jump onto the dangling rebar, produced a deafening roar of metal scraping across metal. Dime-sized rust flakes swirled and sifted down upon Iris's and Vogel's faces. She found herself falling backward while still holding on to the tangled rebar. Go! Vogel's shout cut to the ear-bruising clatter and shriek, snapping her back to full attention. She looked up and strained to focus her sight through the confusing shafts of darkness and criss-crossing searchlight beams. Finally managing to discern Vogel above her and scrambling even higher on the interlaced metal, or at least staying in the same place on top of the hollow mass, as though he were some small animal racing across the surface of a wire-form ball, tumbling down an even wider crevice in the earth. As precarious as his position was, Vogel was still able, between grabbing and pulling himself onto the next sections of rebar, to look over his shoulder and yell down to Iris. Come on! His sharp, angled face contorted with the effort to make himself heard over the metal's noise. Move it! Before Iris could react, the breath was knocked out of her by a vertical angle of concrete rubble slamming against her spine and shoulder blades. Pinned by the tangled mass of rebar against one side of the gap on which it had fallen, She managed to free herself part way by desperately jawing at the metal sections. She had gotten her upper torso free, but could go no further. The rebar halted in toppling down the gap, had shifted with the force of her exertions with a diagonal piece pressing hard against her abdomen. Grimacing with pain, Iris pushed against the metal, feeling its sharp edges slice the shirt beneath her jacket to tattered ribbons and drawing parallel stripes of blood across her flesh. A hand grabbed her under one shoulder and pulled. She knew without looking that it was Vogel, having come back down a few meters on the tangled rebar. Clinging with one hand while reaching for her with the other instead of pushing down on the metal section against her gut, she was now able to instinctively push against it without fear of falling. Her breath rushed into her lungs as the metal bar retreated a precious inch. She let Vogel drag her upward until the rebar section was against the front of her hips, too far down for her to push against it anymore. That no longer mattered, though. She could grab onto the sections near Vogel and help drag herself free. Just as the binding press of the metal flexed and cleared her knees, Iris felt another hand on her body, a tight grasp seizing one ankle from below. She looked down, catching one of the searchlight beams straight into her dazzled eyes, then managing to make out the faceless silhouette of the pursuer who had leapt from the rubble face onto the rebar. The man had reached through the metal sections and caught her. The rough, hollow sphere vibrated dangerously, threatening to dislodge itself from where it had momentarily halted in the ruins' vertical gap. As he locked his fist tighter onto her boot and pulled her toward himself. She knew she had one shot left. Already free of Vogel's grasp, Iris let her arms go straight, dropping herself back down the mass of rebar. That took the pursuer by surprise. He was even more surprised when she pulled her ankle loose from his grip and instead of trying to scrabble away from him again, brought the heel of her boot down hard into his face. Even through the overlapping noises of metal scraping against metal and both Vogel's and the rest of the pursuers' shouts, Iris could hear a satisfying crunch of splintering bone. A wet, red flower blossomed where the bridge of the man's nose had been, and his eyes defocused as his mouth opened wide in shock and pain. His clutching hands jerked apart, then grabbed onto empty air as he fell away from her. Not bothering to watch what happened to him, Iris was already scrambling back up alongside Vogel. Even as she reached that point, the tangle of rebar lurched again, twisting and rolling in the dark gap, and bringing both of them around to what was now its uppermost surface. Iris looked down through the center of the hollow shape and saw that the bloodied pursuer had managed to break his fall at the last possible moment, with one hand having grabbed hold of the metal section at the very bottom of the mass. "It's going!" Vogel, alongside Iris, had also caught sight of what had happened below, then had quickly glanced over to where the rebar's jagged circumference scraped at the vertical sides of the gap. The angle of concrete against which the mass had been jammed tight was beginning to splinter and crumble, a loop of rebar acting like a horizontal chisel point, driven harder by the struggles of the figure underneath. "Jump!" Iris felt a moment of weightlessness, as though gravity itself had been switched off, as she saw the cement outcropping explode into powdery dust and shards, and the rebar fell away beneath her scuffed knees and hands. Her unthinking animal reactions took over. Her boot soles thrust against the last remaining rebar section, even as her fingertips stretched toward the rubble face opposite. With nails clawing into the face's crevices, and the toes of her boots kicking to wedge themselves in as well, Iris clung to the unlit surface, teeth gritting as she pressed herself flat against it. "You're okay," said Vogel quietly from some place close to her. The vertical gap in the ruins of the Tyrell Corporation headquarters had gone completely dark again, the searchlight beams lancing from below having been extinguished by the tumbling fall of the rebar mass. "Get up here." Guided by his voice, Iris climbed onto a narrow ledge of broken concrete, relatively flat and level, and crouched there, letting her pulse and breath slow once more. Keeping back from the crumbling edge, she glanced down and saw nothing. The tangled rebar had fallen with enough velocity to knock the pursuers back down toward the Tyrell private quarters. If the rebar had wedged itself in good and tight in the rubble-lined shaft, it would take them a while to find a way around it. She turned her face upward and felt something cold and wet upon it. For a second, Iris wondered if she had at some point torn her skin. Perhaps a sharp edge of one of the rebar sections across her brow, and hadn't felt it during the chaos and disorientation in the ill-lit ruins. Still kneeling on the ledge, she reached up with one hand and touched her forehead, then drew her fingertips away and rubbed them together. The wetness wasn't sticky enough for it to have been blood, and it didn't taste salty when she put one fingertip to her tongue. But if it's just water, thought Iris, then maybe. "It's rain," she said aloud. Now she recognized the taste, only slightly acidic, only slightly acrid and chemical from its descent through the city's constant atmospheric pollution. Another sensation of damp and cold seeping in from both the ledge and the surrounding rubble. And the slight noise of drops falling onto the hard surfaces indicated that the rainwater was trickling all around her and Vogel. "Look!" Iris fumbled to where his voice had come from, found his arm, and pulled him toward her. She stood up, dragging him along with her, and craned her neck to peer beyond the outcropping of jagged cement above them. Through a narrow triangular hole, she could make out a wedge of the flame-lit underbellies of the storm clouds moving across LA's night sky. "We made it," said Iris, letting go of Vogel and wiping the rain from her face. "We're at the top." "Of course," Vogel sounded amused. "That's what happens when you climb long enough, even with this other stuff happening." Enough dim light trickled into the space for him to be able to indicate a ladder-like slope of debris chunks threaded with the metal reinforcing rods. "This part's easy." True enough, thought Iris, when she pulled herself out from the mouth of the shaft and stood upright again. The wind drove the rain in various pieces of sodden trash. Newspapers with Chinese ideograms for headliners, tattered advertising banners even more obscurely coded, almost horizontal, with enough force that Iris had to brace herself to keep from being knocked over. As Vogel climbed out of the narrow opening behind her, she shielded her eyes and looked about the surrounding cityscape. Like a mountain, thought Iris, ringed by other, taller and spikier mountains, she and Vogel had emerged at what seemed to be the highest point of the Tyrell Corporation ruins. A slope-sided mound of concrete rubble and twisted steel girders poking up from them like the finger bones of an ill-buried giant's corpse. Down in the shaft, winding vertically through the debris by which they had fled from Eldon Tyrell's private quarters, their lungs and trachea had become so coated with inhaled ash and the other byproducts of explosive combustion that they had no longer been able to smell or taste them. A few deep inhalations of the night's rain-wet air, however polluted, brought a black wad onto Iris's tongue that she had to spit out to keep from choking on it. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand as her eyes adjusted to being able to see once more, by the towering buildings as bright pinpoints of light and the intermittent gouts of flame that burst above them. "Great," said Iris. Vogel stood next to her on the uneven, shifting pinnacle, pointlessly brushing off the sleeves and front of his now tattered jumpsuit. "We took the long way out." She had lost all sense of direction, at least as far as compass points were concerned. The direction by which she had first approached the ruins of the Tyrell Corporation headquarters, out on the edges of the surrounding streets, was extinguished from her physical memory. "How do we get off this mess? Looks like a long walk, no matter which way we go." "I don't think," said Vogel quietly, "that we're going to get to make that decision." She saw that he was pointing to the sky. She turned and looked in the direction of his raised hand and extended index finger. A set of lights that she had mistaken for stars dimly breaking through as the rain-depleted clouds thinned and scattered, grew suddenly brighter and agile, swooping down from above. Even before Iris discerned the trails cut across the night's darkness, the flaring lines closer set and visibly hotter than regulation police spinners, she knew they weren't LAPD. As they swooped lower and closer, the engine noises caught up with them, snarling lower in pitch than any cop vehicle, as though predators were already exulting in the catch their claws reached toward. "These are Urbentons?" Iris quickly glanced over at Vogel. "How big a crew does he have working for him, for Christ's sake?" "I don't know," murmured Vogel. The expression on his face, lit by the glow of the spinner trails, was one of baffled dismay. "I must have been wrong down below." One lowered hand gestured toward the exit hole behind him and the Tyrell private quarters at its bottom. "The ones down there weren't the only bunch for us. Somebody had these waiting up here too. But these can't be from Benton. He doesn't have anything like this." "Well, I'm not waiting to find out." Freed of the soul-dampening claustrophobia of the ornately furnished rooms buried somewhere beneath her, as well as the even tighter press of the exit route she had just scraped through, Iris's normal temper flared. If she'd had the time, she would have decked Vogel with a fist to his jaw for needlessly dragging her through that entire vertical tunnel and nearly getting her killed in the process. "We could have stayed right there," thought Iris as she started to run, and saved ourselves the trouble. The slope of the ruins increased her speed. She caught herself with both hands against any outcropping of broken cement and steel that blocked her path, turned and kept her footing on the loose, sliding rubble, and kept running. The spinners, whomever they belonged to, were right above her. Iris could hear the louder snarl of their engines as they swooped and banked only a couple of meters above her head. Searchlight beams lanced around her, racing with the spinners' motion, in front and behind, then locking tight upon her, turning the rubble to a cold blue-white, blinding in its reflected glare. Her broken shadow vaulted across the glacier like concrete flows. Then her running stopped, as she skidded to a stop at a cliff's edge before her. She had to fall back and grab onto the rubble behind to keep herself from going over. The toe of her boot dislodged a piece of concrete small as a pebble. She heard nothing for several seconds, then far below the tiny sound of it clattering against the stratum of ruins at street level. It was worth a shot, Iris told herself, though she had already known that she wasn't going to get away. Just not in the cards. In the distance, blurred by the last of the rain, the lights of the city stacked up to the sky, all of them beyond her reach. Then they were blotted out by the brighter and closer glare of the searchlights, as the anonymous spinners hovered down in front of her and trained their gaze upon the hard, shadowed figure pinned against the rocks, shielding her eyes from the glare.